Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League. This is episode 2 of our 4-part series on 1994-95. We set the scene last week with the summer of 1994, the influence of the World Cup and all the signings. Now it's time to get down to business. Adam's still not with us, but David is here. How are we, Mr. Edgar, this week?
Good, thank you. Looking forward to, as you can maybe see, I've got the beginnings of my Christmas decorations up and out this week. So this will date this if you're watching it in the future. We're recording in December of the year we're recording. But spoke last week. This is a real fun season to get into. Obviously, we wish Adam was here and hasty back. Be with us as soon as he can, but he would have loved / being agog at this Tottenham Hotspur side and their tactics, and they see everything old is new again. Ange Postecoglou at Tottenham, well, ask your uncle, ask your granda, they knew.
Indeed, we'll get to that in due course. True Lies, David, was probably the best film you could see on the opening weekend of 1994-95. 4 wins, still in the top 10, which means top of the pops would be...
Love Is All Around by Wet, 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 which was there interminably, and it made a lot of money for its writer, Reg Presley of the Trogs, more, in fact, than his career had made. And do you know what he spent it on?
I do not.
Crop circle research.
Wow. You can never be too sure.
He was very into his crop circles, and he spent his millions of pounds on crop circle research for it to turn out that it was indeed a hoax, which has got to be quite disappointing, really, when you've put that much effort and money into it. But True Lies, for boys our age, the Jamie Lee Curtis in that movie was a lasting memory.
It was just good fun, David, besides that. Okay, the football. We talked last week about the impact of USA 94 on signings. The thing we didn't talk about, because I was keeping it for this week, was the impact of the law changes for that World Cup, which do happen around World Cups, and then you get this follow-on into the season with a lot of conversation / hysteria about what it's going to mean in the game's gone and everything else. But laws that needed to change, the tackle from behind, slide tackles, but even kind of more school headmasterly approaches to dissent and things like that, very much taking kind of hard line on field behaviour. This was the absolute talk of the pre-season, those early weeks, and who's going to be left on the park, David, in England, if you're going to, outlaw a lot of these challenges? This is our game being watered down. It's what gone mad.
Yes. I think that quite often after tournaments, less so now in a much more globalised age, and decisions being communicated much quicker at that level. But post-World Cup, there tends to be a real splurge of these new rules being applied, sometimes by referees who maybe don't have the full understanding of them yet and are keen to show that they have mastered this. So you did tend to get, after a major tournament, you're absolutely right, where there was a big clampdown, and we would be told about this before. Platini was always big on it, wasn't he? Coming out before a Euros and telling us, this is changing. And then you would see it in the domestic game. And then after about, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, it would calm down. Everybody would kind of get their head on. But it's such a strange thing to talk about now for the likes of us and for viewers who were about at the time, that things that now are just, when we see it on a football field, we're absolutely stunned. Red cards straight away, that were just part of the game back then. They really were. Maybe in the same way that you and I could, in the 90s, watch that famous Leeds-Chelsea match from the FA Cup in 1970 and laugh and go, my goodness, right? And our parents would go, what? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Game's gone now. But yeah, the tackle from behind was a big one. And it was perfectly acceptable in the UK for a defender to get the ball by going through the man to do so. And if the back of your legs happen to be in the road, then it was okay, so long as at some point while going through you, he connected with the ball, it was fine. And we have seen a lot of changes because there was a desire that, look, we are going to make football better to watch. And that means protecting ball players. And it's not just one thing. It's also pitches, right? We don't want to see football being played on these terrible pitches that favour teams putting the ball in the air, and skillful players are taken out of the match by condition. The pitch is a great leveler. It's not a phrase you hear anymore because it doesn't happen anymore. Even when you watch lower league football now, the pitches are incredible quality compared to what, we grew up, I was going to say playing on, but we had to play on red ash, which is an experience that scarred many a young Scotsman. But I think that there was this move post Van Basten injury, of course, that hang on a minute here. These are the guys that people turn up to watch. And in this era, there's no getting away from it. And these are the guys we can market. We can market these people. People will turn up to watch these guys. They're exciting. Young people will get the names on the back of their shirt. And we've seen that, I think. It's one of the interesting things that we'll cover, I think, throughout the show. The rise of individualism within football. Now, there's always been talented individuals. Every team always had their hero. I get that, George Best in the 60s. But the brand of a player is something that I think has really taken off in the last 8 years, to the point now you do get kids who are Ronaldo fans and they are Messi fans. They'll be extreme examples of it. Mbappe and whatnot, and you get kids asking for PSG shirts because Mbappe was there, then they want a Real Madrid shirt because he's there. And I think that football's, if you like, the people at that thought, what we cannot have are these guys being out of the game for long periods of time because they're being kicked out of the game. And it has led to I think, far more attacking football, and it's led to players being able to express themselves far more than they would, because there's still a bit of me, unreconstructed male, approaching my 50s, that if I see a player, particularly against my own club, I'll admit this, who is showboating a little, my first thought is that someone in my team should go and smash him, because that was a perfectly acceptable tactic to do when I was growing up. And FIFA and UEFA, they said, look, we're no longer going to put up with this. And the Premier League said, look, we want to encourage, we're starting to get these guys coming in, these really exciting talents. We're starting to grow our own domestic stars. Ryan Giggs is poster boy for that at the moment. People will pay money to watch them, and they're not going to pay money to watch defenders kick them out of the game. So, yep, it was a big thing. And you're right, at the start of this season, there were a lot more yellow cards going out for tackles that previously would have been, and I remember, and we'll come to it, the 98 World Cup, they decided, and it got slightly miscommunicated, that any tackle from behind would be a red card. And there was famously, I think it was Morten Vikhorst, when playing for Denmark, who literally sort of went up to press an opponent and sort of bumped into him from behind. And of course, the opponent went down and he was sent off because it was a tackle from behind. So things like that can happen, but it does tend to calm down after a few weeks once people get their head around it.
I think, again, it's about television. I know that's my obsession around football in the 80s and 90s, and this misunderstanding about television, now very much not a misunderstanding, absolutely zeroed in on what TV can do. And it's shaping the game, not just for the people they are baying for blood, because that's kind of what the match-going fan has always done. English football, like anyone else, have always had exciting young prospects, but they've had no issue with giving them a tough and hard school in Ox to, sharpen up their talent the hard way. But it's more, no, we need a game that your average subscriber will want to watch, and it wasn't what was getting played in 1984. So everything is about the aesthetic. Let's start with Spurs then, Davey. An interesting kind of time for them. We talked about the Klinsmann signing amongst others last week. But, they were going into the season in a kind of weird situation, issues that had taken place, I think, in the 1980s, irregularities. Financial irregularities, by the way, going to be a phrase that we're going to become quite familiar with over the next few episodes. I think payments made to players, and I think we're hit with maybe a 650 grand fine, 12-point deduction, banned from the FA Cup. They fought that. I think the fine went up, but they were allowed the football penalties to be removed and, starting from scratch. So you've got that in the background as we approach this season. And then this famous five, as it became known, probably a bit unfairly, to be honest. 5 players who started 6 games, the first 6 games, and when 2 of those players are Nick Barmby and Darren Anderton, you'll maybe not be too shocked as to why that run of consistent starting performance didn't maintain way into the coming months. But it was Anderton out on the right. It was Dumitrescu on the left. You had Sheringham and Barmby and Klinsmann, David, who made sure that the letter N, the Spurs ran out of N's in the club shop with people wanting his name on the top. A new development, as we've discussed in the English game, and quite fashionable. It went gangbusters, mainly because of this opening game at Hillsborough against Sheffield Wednesday, where we saw, I think, a lot of the Spurs season that was about to unfold into 2-0 lead. I think get pulled back, go back ahead 4-2. Then I think there's a third there as well. Defensively shabby, but I mean Sheringham is just gracefully brilliant. They've got power there as well. Anderton looks sensational as well. And the fourth goal, I think Sky had a camera on Klinsmann just kind of covering him, and it's just so redolent of his World Cup performance, which really was the only time we had really seen him, let's be honest, at that point. Not watching a lot of early German football, but even at Inter, when he was there, you're not getting a lot of coverage at that particular point in time. Certainly not watching a lot of Monaco from 92 to 94. But he's always looking, always dangerous. He makes that run to the back post. It's a thunderous header. And Terry Sheringham told him before, if you score, you need to make, by totally oblivious he was to all this opprobrium that was getting rained down upon him about his theatrics. He said, if you score, you need to dive. We'll all dive with you. He did, they did. And almost instantly, David, that rage, all that kind of noise just disappeared, and he charmed England instantly, like a bird out the trees. He was just a kind of personality the Premier League was desperate for. Cantona was already there, huge personality, but he had a darkness to him, which was alluring. But here was someone who he spoke brilliantly. He was always available for interviews. His English was absolutely superb. He was a charming professional footballer, and Spurs loved him, but England kind of loved him pretty quickly too, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Cantona was a superstar, but he was sort of an English-grown superstar in that when he arrived, other than people who followed continental football quite closely, weren't massively.
And warned that he was a nutcase.
Well, don't
touch him.
If people had heard of him, it was, this guy's good player, but he's a loony. And he the Cantona mythology grew in England back then, and we've discussed this on earlier shows. When you were growing up, you saw these guys. You knew the names. You read about them in Shoot, and you'd get their picture in the Topical Times Annual. But you only really got to see them at World Cups. And if you were playing for Germany, Italy, Brazil, one of the biggies, Spain, England, you were a superstar. And he was the superstar in that German team. And then, of course, the English, they'd come up against the German. There's the rivalry there anyway. And the German side at that time were they dived a lot, right? I mean, there's no other way, but they were bad. See, when you watch it back now as well, they were awful at it. And maybe we've just become inured to it by modern diving where they're very good at it. But back then it was literally, over the top of a challenge. But again, it was a cultural thing. Everybody did it in Germany. If you watch German football at the time, which is, I suspect, by the way, one of the reasons why it never really took off over here in the way that Italian football and Spanish football did, because there was this sort of over-elaborate, sort of almost choreographed play acting. But so Klinsmann was bête noire, right? Oh, terrible and very good. And we really hate people like that who annoy us, but actually can back it up. But he was a superstar, and here he is in England. And it's big now because, yes, he's a superstar. He's not one they've grown. He is arriving and he's choosing to be there. This is the hot girl asking you to go to the dance. And then he shows a sense of humour, a bit of self-deprecating humour. We Brits love that. We absolutely love that. It was funny. And it was iconic, but it was funny straight away. Somebody that can laugh at himself. As you say, not really because he didn't have a clue that it was happening. But his personality, I'm glad you brought that up because he's very charming. He comes across superbly in an interview. He is funny. He is self-deprecating. He comes across modestly, which I think he didn't play like that, but he comes across like that. And people just took to him. They just really warmed to him very, very quickly. And he was also very good. I mean, you're right, that camera, I remember seeing that. The movement's superb. If you watch him, he's going, he's checking his run, he's pulling a defender, then he's back a half a yard just to open up a little bit of space. It's top class striking play. It really is. And it ends in the finish. And you're right, it was one of the defining images, I would say, of this era of the Premier League, is that dive. Everybody was doing it the next week at fives or at kids at the back. It was the thing. Everyone was doing it. It spread into other leagues, people doing it. It became absolutely enormous. And, he was by such a huge addition to the Premier League roster at this point. And he brought a massive amount of glamour, the big, tall, blonde, world-renowned striker of this German team, which had been, of course, so fantastically successful, previously, up really till that previous World Cup. So I think that people were kind of ready for that. We were ready for these stars to come in and do it. Also, the fact, Martin, he comes and he's very good. And that is
it does help, doesn't it?
He's not a retirement home guy. He's coming here and he's and also he kind of played in a British way. In that, you put the ball into him, he'd go and compete for it. He wasn't standing. He's very brilliant in the air. And I think he was committed and wholehearted. And you're right, by about 3 weeks in, it's only really Arsenal fans that don't like him.
The Spurs side that started against Sheffield Wednesday, Ian Walker's in goal. Stuart Nethercott and a young Sol Campbell are your centre backs. David Kerslake and Justin Edinburgh are your fullbacks. Can we say a word of prayer for Colin Calderwood, a centre half by trade?
Yes,
who is the midfield?
Yeah.
As a one, and of course that five
the
that
five
we talked about, with probably an expectation that Barnby would drop deep, and maybe Dumitrescu and Anderton would do their doggies as well. But ultimately, Ardiles, who, we've covered them. Yeah, Spurs were attacking. He had an attacking philosophy, and that's very clear. Spurs were involved last season in some high scoring games, but nothing like this. Hibs had the famous five of the 50s, but a very different football.
They played 2-3-5.
2-3-5 was it was kind of de rigueur.
So did everybody. Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah. But Ardiles has kind of said later as well, effectively Barcelona have done that, but they didn't have Colin Calderwood as the holding and indeed only midfielder. How that was ever going to work, other than looking at those five and saying, my word, how many goals do we have in that? It doesn't matter how many we concede. We're always going to, by the law of averages, we're always going to outscore, or at least not be beaten. And they did start brightly. I think they were 1-up in a game because Manchester United beat them because they do, and they were 1-up, I think, at home to Southampton. And they get dragged back in. I think Letizia scores 2 goals. One of them's a penalty, and possibly a bit debatable whether Campbell brought the boy down in the box or outside. But
I think VAR would ask it to have a look at that one.
Nevertheless, it was a system that just wasn't going to work. Yeah, they lose 3 in a row, and. Yeah, only 2 wins, I think, after that nice spell of 3 out the opening 4 games. And bless him, David Ardiles by November would be shown the door. It is outrageous. I mean, even if gung-ho, forward thinking, front foot, and Keegan's obviously going to be in this kind of mold that will outscore you, and that's where I want to put all my eggs in that particular offensive looking basket. But you still need something of security, and they just did not have the players. Workman-like fullbacks, a very young, promising centre back, but nowhere near the kind of stature that he would later become. And again, some kind of just jobbers is too hard, but they're pros. They're working professionals.
They're not Premier League legends.
No, they're not.
No,
and it was never going to happen.
If you want to be generous, you'd say it's romantic. The ideal that we're going to score more goals and we're going to play entertaining football. That's the most important thing with Tottenham. And we hear a lot from Tottenham over the years about the way they like to play football. They are probably second only to the West Ham way, I would say, in an exaggerated sense of a style of football based on a now almost mythical period that isn't really remembered because it's not, you can't argue with it because it's not chronicled in the way that modern football, where you can just go and watch all of it. So it becomes a sort of, it's the merry old England really of football fan tactics. It's this half remembered, could it be real thing. So Tottenham have had that, but you have to be realistic and also say it's naive, because as you say, if you're going to do this, then you need to have, well, Rodri, really, who didn't exist back then. But you need to have an amazing number 6 defensive midfielder, whatever you want to call it, holding midfielder. Well, even then, we would call it a holding midfielder. You need to have somebody that's mobile, that sniffs at danger, that gets about the field, has a sense of when, and can then win the ball back and give it immediately. That's the centre half you've got in there. Now, he can tackle, obviously, and hopefully sense danger, but he's not going to have the mobility of a Roy Keane or even a Steve McMahon. He's not going to have that, and he's not going to have the ability to take the ball on the half turn, which you have to do as well if you're going to. Otherwise, you're just going to end up shelling it long to these guys. So you are right to point out that that's not a great defence. It has a great defender in it who will become a great defender, but he's not at this point, Sol Campbell. And therefore, you're going to expose that defence, that workman-like defence. I remember at the time the Guardian journalist David Lacey saying that Ossie Ardiles, if we can thank him for one thing, it is that he ended the age-old mantra of a football fan of "I just want to be entertained." He said because there was no ground more entertaining or no team more entertaining to watch than Tottenham Hotspur. Their matches were wild, they were chaotic, there were goals aplenty, but they tended to lose them, and their fans wanted them sacked. They were not leaving there saying, "God, I got my money's worth today." You know, we lost 5-3, but it was thoroughly entertaining stuff.
But in the northeast of England, there's a manager and the support saying, "Hold my beer," because we will do that. And if we do lose 4-3, so be it. That's the way it should go. And it was definitely not the end of those kind of principles.
No, but that. Sure. Yeah, but they're just in the Premier League, right? They are back after a few years out, and they're enjoying that. They're enjoying that run. It will change for them in the next few years. The frustration does build that they're not winning trophies. Tottenham are already at that. They're past that. They're, been in the first division since the late 70s at this point. They expect to win trophies, and I think that Ardiles, look, it would be wonderful if it worked, wouldn't it? That you sign 5 great attackers who can play together, by the way. Like, they're not diametrically opposed. You see how it works, as you mentioned. He's in the right, Dimitrescu's in the left. You've got your 2 strikers. Sheringham is brilliant foil for a striker like Klinsmann, right? So Anderton, hard-working player in there as well. So you can see, but you look at that 5 that's behind them, and you think, wow, teams are going to score against that. And the other thing is that I hate to be the guy who's telling people about, Santa, but other teams, professional managers, are going to look at that and say, right, here's how we negate this. These are good players, so we're going to stop the supply to that front too, right? And we'll choke them off in the middle of the pitch. And these horrible things called tactics are going to come into play, and they're going to be used, and it's not going to be romantic, it's not going to be glamorous, but you're going to be done by sides who will look at the flaws in that fundamentally flawed system and do it. Now, you said right at the start, and you're so right, you can maybe get away with this if you have an exceptional back 4 and an exceptional guy sitting at number 6.
Yeah.
You're still going to lose goals, by the way, but you might not lose as many, and you'll be able to get the ball. But you're looking at a situation where Tottenham are basically 2 halves of a side. There's a goalkeeper, then there's 2 halves of this side, one of which is considerably more talented than the other, and one of which is going to be asked to do a lot more than the other. It can't work. It can't. What I would say is that if Spurs had gone in a traditional 4-4-2 with that defence, I still think they're in a bit of bother.
Yeah, it's not good. They bring in Gigi Popescu in the end of September. Brilliant. Not world-class centre-back, but very, very good centre-back. It doesn't change much. I think his debut, they lose 4-1 to newly promoted Nottingham Forest, more of which after this. But
Ardiles, when he did leave, though, I wanted, just before I forget this, sorry to interrupt, but his interview where he said in that wonderful accent of his, "I did it my way."
Good for him.
That's what he said. He said he had no regrets, and as he put it, as Frank Sinatra said, "I did it my way."
He did. That Spurs, Jerry Francis and his hair will be along to rescue them. We
need to have a show just dedicated to Jerry Francis's hair. You and I obviously are in no position to...
Just jealous.
Well, we're not coming at it from anything other than jealousy. There are like 4 haircuts going on there simultaneously. He has the trendiest haircut from the previous 4 decades, all happening at once. It's a magnificent barnet. And the only thing I think to rival it at this point is the aforementioned Ian Walker's 90s curtains. Because
that's the ultimate
curtains.
Yeah. That is pure 1994 right there, and then he doesn't shift that for a while. Anyway, that's Spurs. We'll take a break, and we've got plenty more to talk about from those opening months of 94-95. Welcome back, listeners. Let's talk about some other things. We talked about Nottingham Forest at the end, who battered Spurs 4-1 later on. They were away, David, away for the season. Frank Clark now in charge after, of course, the retirement of Clough. Just 1 year away, and they are back with a bang. They go on quite a run at the start of the season without defeat. Some experienced heads still there. Stuart Pearce is still very much kicking a ball. But Stan Collymore has picked up his ticket. He's joined the queue of very exciting English forwards. Sir Alex Ferguson absolutely rated him at this time, feared him as well. He equalised in a 1-1 draw at the City Ground with United earlier in the season. But he and them really picked up the just kind of where they'd left off, because they were pretty dreadful when they went down, but feeling like they should be there. They're a club with some heritage, and they've got some added energy. Brian Roy, of course, we talked about last week, coming from Serie A, coming from a fairly impressive show at the World Cup as well. And they've got spring in their step for sure.
Yeah, they definitely did. Frank Clark was a really sensible appointment. That's not an easy job at all. As we've seen post-Ferguson, post-Wenger, I suppose you may say, well, they're in the Clough era ending on a relegation at least gives you that chance for a slight rebuild. But it was just a really good, because he was part of that great Forest side and popular with the supporters, but hadn't, he'd been away and learned his managerial trade as well. So it was a really good appointment, and they were very good coming up the previous year. Collymore, and again, it's difficult to separate the man from what we're about to talk about, and again, to people now who have in their image of who he is. But when he came through at this point, or came to notice, much in the way Andy Cole had the year before, it was like, wow. And in the case of Collymore, I think he had, of all the great young English strikers that are coming through at this point, led of course by Cole and Fowler, he was probably the most complete. And by that, what I mean is Cole and Robbie Fowler were magnificent 18-yard box strikers. They really were. The movement was terrific. The shot selection was terrific. But Collymore had pace and power and an individual skill level that they didn't. Collymore was someone who was able to pick the ball up on the halfway line, turn, drive and score goals, and do it regularly. There were comparisons. I know this, people are going to think, David, go back and look. There were comparisons to Ronaldo, original Ronaldo, at this point, because they had similar styles. They were big, athletic players who were incredibly quick for their size, who were very skillful, had the ability to go past players, as well as get on the end of things. And he arrived looking pretty complete, and he goes off like a train this season. Forest, I think, firstly, the gap isn't at this point between, well, at the time, Division 1, but Championship and Premiership as it is now, right? The gap is not as big, which is why
it's nowhere near. I mean,
no,
it's almost incomparable.
Not, yeah,
and remember not. Yeah, and remember that Newcastle United had finished third the previous season,
and
not to spoil it, Forest are going to finish fairly high as well.
Yeah, so Europe as well.
It's not ridiculous, and again, they are a club that allowed their legendary manager basically complete control over the future and kind of withered with him, but would have still felt like a club that, we deserve to be here. We deserve to be back for a start and to compete.
We felt like that watching them. It's Forest. Forest should be in the Premier League. They should be a top team, and they should be a good team in that. It was more shocking that they were getting relegated than it was them being back and doing well.
I mean, not to, say too much, and we'll try and pick this story up. Their season really is in three very distinct thirds: good, shit, good, or very good, shit, very good. I mean, it's quite an incredible wobbly winter that they have, and we'll maybe get into why when we pick it back up. But a fantastic start, unbeaten in the first 11 matches. They're going to be unbeaten in the last 12, 13, only 4 draws in there. So my word, if they had put a few bits together in the winter, who knows? Wee bit of love for Steve Stone as well. I thought he was very gifted midfielder, never showy at a time where maybe we just talked about a striker from Germany with loads of charisma and character. We've waxed lyrical already about Cantona and the various players that Manchester United have at this minute in time in terms of younger players, Lee Sharp, Ryan Giggs. He didn't have that, but I thought he was a super player around this time, David.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And again, he was one that I think neutrals picked up on, thought, wow, he's really talented. But you're right, quiet, unassuming, bald, and with the exception of Attilio Lombardo, it's difficult to be a glamorous ball player in this era up until the arrival of Zidane, who shows the world that actually hair is an encumbrance and you don't need it. But he was very skillful, but there was work rate there. I'd actually compare him to winger from the 80s who was, I think, slightly underrated, Brian Marwood of Sheffield Wednesday and Arsenal. That he was maybe not the most flamboyant of players, but I think a manager would trust him more, which is when you look at George Graham, he was an important player for him. And Stone was like that. He would do your doggies that you mentioned earlier, but you didn't have to worry about him doing his defensive work, which now, of course, is standard. But it wasn't then. Wingers were allowed in the popular imagination to sort of stand and wait for the ball out in the wing, so long as they got to the byline occasionally. And he could do that. He was also a good finisher, Steve Stone. I remember, you got him into those positions and he would take full advantage of it. I think just a genuinely fun player to watch because he had skill and he would go past people. Quick, but didn't rely entirely on pace, but could use it. And as I say, just a dream to play with because he would get up and down that wing. Like I say, he reminded me a lot of Brian Marwood, and maybe also a next iteration on from the Trevor Steven we saw at Everton. I think he was, I think that Steven was a more complete player, but Stone maybe had the advantage over him in terms of wide play. Steven was a lot about power and pace in his Everton days, hitting that byline and getting the ball across. His delivery was superb. But the names I'm mentioning, I think, show you the impact that he was having. And it was interesting because although Collymore was grabbing the headlines, deservedly so, I think people were noticing Stone. There was talk of England, because he was so consistent. And every time you watched him, he was good. And that's a pretty, people do notice that if every time Forest are in a live game, he's being praised by the commentators, it sinks in. And again, that's a different, to go back to your television point, that's a difference from 10 years ago when we're only maybe seeing highlights. Unless you're going to the games or, maybe reading the match reports. Now we're seeing it and we're seeing it ourselves every week. So people are starting to sink into your consciousness more.
Absolutely. I have to talk about this because I will not give up any opportunity to do so. 28th August, David, Super Sunday, you're sitting down. You've had your lunch, you're a bit full. It's Liverpool versus Arsenal, 2 giants of the game in England at Anfield. A cracking contest in store. It's fairly edgy with 25, 26 minutes to go. And by 31 minutes, the match is over. There's a 5-minute hat-trick by Robbie Fowler. Goal was very different, but again, I just can't get over just how many of these players look incredible at this time. At a time where the hype machine is really getting ramped up, at a time where football and celebrity and music and showbiz is very much, these are two streams that are intertwining. The excitement around players like this, right at this moment, he'd be with a Spice Girl soon enough because they all had to be. He was sensational, and this is an Arsenal defence, by the way, that we talked about last week on the way to Winners' Cup win, the 1-0 to the Arsenal. This is that defence, and he's just electric. No one is sniffing out danger. Leave that joke alone. In the box as he does. His movement, his intelligence, and his finishing. And that kind of devastating 5-minute hat trick in a big game, sensational.
Yeah, and I think you identified the key points for me about Robbie Fowler. Was first of all the instinct that he had, which is important for any striker, and being aware of where your pomo is, where you're most likely to pick up space and scraps. The ability to find space is such an underrated quality in football, because, as you mentioned earlier, to watch it, you pretty much have to just keep your eye on that person the whole game. But I love watching a striker who can do that. It's movements that seem at the time not to make much of a difference, but then when they all add up, it's the half step to bring a defender forward before you then spin off in the other direction, and you buy yourself. It's the timing of it. There's almost a sort of there's a kind of pleasing geometry to it, because it's about just opening. You only need that little bit of space for a split second, and he was an absolute master of it. But then, on top of all that, Martin, shot selection, finish selection. Robbie Fowler was terrific at it.
Brilliant decision maker, yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. He picked the right finish time after time. And I think also you mentioned there, like we were talking about, like Collymore, who's big, handsome, athletic guy. Fowler was like a tyro. He looked like a guy off the terraces, and I think that's easy to identify with. A bit like Paul Gascoigne, that there's a bit of us that love a guy who looks like us, but is blessed with this inordinate talent. Because some people, you just think, well, I could never be him. Like, look at him, right? He's gorgeous. He's built like, a model, and he's phenomenal. And I think the guys that you look at and you go, actually, that could have been me if it hadn't been for, a few too many fish suppers or that knee injury I got. They let you dream. But Fowler was just terrifically exciting at this time. I think as well there's something romantic to football fans about boyhood club, or in his case, boyhood city. But he was dynamite, wasn't he? I mean, we're a bit away from it, but that performance at Old Trafford in the Cantona comeback game, where he's just unplayable. He never stopped. He must have been an absolute pain in the arse to defend against, because he's always working for that bit of space. He's always working, and you've got to concentrate for 90 plus minutes against them, because you switch off for a second, he's gone. You can forget it. A guy who we talked about on our Champions League show who was like that was Pippo Inzaghi.
Yeah,
that it's just, the level of concentration. Players must have come off, defenders must have come off the field absolutely knackered mentally, because it's one thing if you've got a physical contest with somebody, right? It's right in front of you. You know what you need to do, right? Robbie Fowler engaged your brain. Robbie Fowler made you think, am I in the right spot? Am I going to be in the right spot in 30 seconds? What happens? Because he was 2 or 3 moves ahead of you. And that's why he got so many goals. Ian Wright was brilliant at that as well. And it's only, I think, a real elite breed of goal scorer who can do that. But this particular game, you're right as well. It just was so quick. The atmosphere at Anfield, obviously, any ground where there's a 5-minute hat trick, there's going to be an amazing atmosphere. But to do it in that game against Arsenal, if memory serves, he really did take it out on Arsenal over the years, didn't he?
Yeah,
a phenomenal record against them.
I'm fairly sure it's not the only hat trick either. And an Anfield without the Kop, the standing Kop, the bottom half had been seated, I think, at that point. Liverpool started very, very nicely under Roy Evans, loads of goals. There's quite a few pace setters that we'll come to in a moment. We'll take a break in a wee minute, David, but I don't want to go into Mike Walker again, but his relationship with Everton is not long for this world. A couple of things to talk about before we take that break. He tried to come to our club and resurrect his season. There's supposed to be 3 Rangers players went down. Trevor Steven, of course, Everton legend, was supposed to be one of them, but on a permanent deal, but it just wasn't fit enough. So Ian Durrant and Duncan Ferguson went down, both on loan, and the intention was that Durrant was down on loan but to sign permanently, and Duncan Ferguson was just down to get some football and play his way back into form and then return and basically take up the position that he was, supposed to take at Rangers when he was signed the previous season. And it didn't quite turn out that way. Duncan Ferguson was an immediate hit. Durrant was very much underused, underappreciated by a manager who was just out of his depth in terms of the size of club, the size of player that he's kind of dealing with. But obviously, Duncan Ferguson would then go into legend. A lot of Everton fans say I maybe overplayed legend in terms of the minutes he gave and the contribution did. But cult hero, personality, we've talked about this quite a lot already in this show. It's kind of where English football is really going because, again, it fits our rolling news coverage. It fits all these hours that Sky have to fill with coverage of football. But that wasn't supposed to work out that way, but it would very much work out that way, and a happier story at the end of the season, which we will come to. But on that, David, but also there are 4 teams going down this year as they move from the bigger league from 22 to 20. So a lot of pressure on managers will come next week to managers just disappearing left, right and centre. It really is carnage in the winter of 94, 95. But yeah, a roll of the dice for Everton that didn't save Mike Walker's job, but it would create a legend anyway.
Yeah, it would. And some people just find a club, don't they? I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever that Duncan Ferguson has a deep and enduring love affair with Everton. It's his club, and he will always be now a part of their story. It is interesting because it does, I think, get overplayed by non-Everton fans because he was injured a lot in his time at Everton. So he never really hit what he could have been. I think in his career, full stop, because of injury. It never really happened. But he'd been so promising coming through in Scotland. Rangers bought him, but it's one of these nice ideas in theory. They bought him to replace Mark Hateley, who did not need replacing. Hateley at this point was terrorising defences all in Europe. He was one of the best strikers in Europe at that time. Teams feared him. And he wasn't minded to give his spot up. There was none of this, right, I'm going to bring you in and under my wing thing from Big Hateley. It was, no, that's my shot and I'm keeping it. And then Ferguson, of course, he got into trouble. He went to jail for a non-pitch. Well, not just a non-pitch, it was because he was on probation. But he got a 12-game suspension from the SFA before the trial was heard, which was prejudicial. And he just, he'd wrapped playing for Scotland. He needed to get away and go somewhere where he was loved. And that's what happened. The Durrant story, I think, is absolute proof of the incompetence of Mike Walker. He didn't know who Ian Durrant was. Now, first of all, Ian Durrant had not been a bit part player in Scotland, right? He'd achieved a lot. Secondly, this is a Rangers team who the previous season had been within 1 goal of the European Cup final, and Ian Durrant was the main reason, along with the aforementioned Hateley, for that happening. He had terrified that great Marseille team. He had just been absolutely superb, and Walker didn't know who he was. Can you imagine that in modern football now? A manager not bothering to find out, and then, as you say, underusing him. And I'm glad of this as a Rangers supporter, because Durrant came back and played many a big game for Rangers over the next 4 years, including a vital one at Parkhead in '97. So I just think it's shockingly unprofessional. But yeah, it was a good move for Duncan. If you have a spare moment, folks, go back and watch the press conference to announce Durrant and Ferguson going there, because the suits on display, none more night, big boxy multicoloured pastel things, and they are worth checking out. But yeah, he went on, and look, we spoke earlier about likability. Who doesn't like Big Dunk? He's heart on the sleeve, he's funny, and I think we would all, if we were going into battle, we would like a mate like Big Dunk to be coming in with us.
Indeed. Fine moment to take a break. We've got some of the big hitters and real pace setters to touch on after this. Welcome back. Before we talk about, I guess, the three sides that are really coming to the fore at this moment in time, a wee check on Europe and where English clubs are. Manchester United are in the Champions League, but finding the going very tough, especially in the Nou Camp famously, but also in Sweden, where Gothenburg turned them over as well. So a disappointing group stage there. Happier news in the Cup Winners' Cup, which always seems to serve England well. Arsenal and Chelsea both still very much in there, and they will be in the quarterfinals come the springtime. The UEFA Cup, maybe less so. Blackburn. And maybe this was a good thing overall, but embarrassingly knocked out to Trelleborg of Sweden in the first round of the UEFA Cup. I mean, just an absolute shambles. A bit of incredible story, and then heartbreak for Aston Villa, and beaten Inter Milan, or actually Inter, to be correct, on penalties at home. An incredible night at Villa Park, but then Trabzonspor knocked them out, and that was kind of the end for Ron Atkinson. Again, we'll touch on that next week when P45s are getting dished out everywhere, but that probably just signalled they weren't absolutely firing the league, and when that romance died, that momentum disappeared, and that was that. Newcastle had beaten Antwerp 10-3 or something in aggregate, 10-2 maybe in the first round, but Athletic Bilbao and the away goals, those cheeky foreigners up to their old tricks by scoring away from home, and that did for Keege's boys. But I always think the UEFA Cup is the barometer, weirdly enough, around this time,
league,
about how strong your league is, what kind of depth you have, and a sign that England are still miles and miles away. Speaking of Kevin Keegan and Newcastle, they were the absolute pace setters at the start of that season, David. I think Andy Cole had 8 goals, maybe in 11. Again, just picking up where he left off. He was the Golden Boot winner the season before. They were topping the table. They were exciting, and they were also kind of getting wins out from difficult situations. I know they drew with Blackburn at home. I think Shearer put Blackburn ahead, and they needed a kind of scrambled last-minute equaliser just to keep that unbeaten run up. But Newcastle and Cole were superb. And here's the thing. 29th of October actually is quite a kind of interesting date, because Newcastle go to Old Trafford. They lose 2-0. Manchester United had beaten Blackburn, I think, in the midweek before that. and then Blackburn go to Nottingham Forest, another club who hadn't lost by that point, and Blackburn win, and then Blackburn go on a run over that winter that's obviously going to see them in fine form by the end. It's going to be very valuable by the end as they start to stutter again. But they respond. Forest don't respond to that defeat. They go in a bit of a tailspin for that winter and then pick it up again. And so do Newcastle from that defeat to United. And it's perhaps telling. And this is the Manchester United side. We haven't started brilliantly. They're not top of the table there. They're actually quite a wee bit behind in the October. So the early October where United, I think, had lost to just bring it up. They'd lost to Leeds, then beaten Liverpool, lost to Ipswich, beaten Everton, and then lost to Sheffield Wednesday. So that's 3 away games in a row that they lose just by the start of October. They're in 5th place. They're 7 points behind Newcastle at this point, David. But they never go in that tailspin thing. And to be fair, neither did Blackburn at that time, whereas Forest and Newcastle do. And I think that is kind of telling as to what you've got under the bonnet, and when the wind changes, what you're able to do. Newcastle, after setting the place alight, are going to drift. There'll be another reason for that we'll cover next week. But you've got defeats happen in football, right? But you have to bounce back. You can't let one become 2, 3, 4 without a win. Turbulence is one thing. Tailspin crashes is another.
Yeah, I wonder if you're a vibey club or having a vibey season, if you can get caught up in it, updrafts and backdrafts. Because, you're right there. And I think if you look at the sides involved in that, then they are sides that there's a lot of momentum. And when it runs out, maybe then, everybody just collects himself and it's like waking from a fever dream. And there was definitely some signs of that there. This is there's still 22 teams, man, 42 games. They're in Europe as well. This is a lot of football. And I know back then we didn't talk about such things as tired. Do you know how much they're earning?
Red zone.
Rotation. What? I know that it was not considered an appropriate conversation for the dinner table back then, but it does have an effect. And then it is, can you gut it out? Can you grit it out? And then that's when being a winner previously helps. That mentality, that muscle memory, to use your phrase, that just kicks in. And also having a requisite number of players in the team who can kind of scrap and get you through when you're not firing, when you're not on form. Or conversely, a very reliable piece of skill guy who will dig out something and get you through those games. I think the way Blackburn were set up, it's almost, to modernise, rudimentary, the way that Blackburn play football. They win the ball, they get it to the wide men deliver it, the 2 big lads in the middle try to get in the end of it, and the midfield rush in to compete for second balls. But that is a system that you can play when you're not in your best form. It doesn't, it's not intricate. And I'm not disparaging it, by the way, because it clearly worked. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of hard work and people who are good at the components of it. People who can consistently deliver accurate crosses into the right spaces. People who can get on the end of the midfielders that can get box to box. But it also doesn't break down if somebody's got an injury in the way that some modern systems can. If there's one particular, Rodri, again, if there's one component of it that isn't there, then you can begin to worry about its overall effectiveness. And it was maybe that. And I think as well that, there is a sense at Newcastle and at Forest of there's still a bit of novelty. They're not only back, but they're back and competing. And, they really like their team. They really like their managers. They're youngish teams in the main. There's a few experienced players, but there's a lot of youngsters, particularly that Newcastle team, and a lot of local lads as well. So there's a strong identification with it. And it's all just a bit of a buzz and a party, and then you get a defeat and it's like, oh, well, and it sort of just slows everybody down, and it can take a week or two to pick everybody back up. Whereas you're experienced, yeah, we should be going for the Premier League title, guys. Ferguson and Dalglish have no time for your nonsense when it comes to that. They are not about vibes. They are about, I want 3 points on Saturday. I don't care if you play badly. We'll worry about that on the bus home, but go out there and get me the points. So I think that kind of almost a pragmatism under this, but 42 games, Martin, you're going to lose some matches. You just are.
The 2-0 win for Blackburn at the City ground, Chris Sutton scored both goals. And I think for all the games between the start of the season till New Year's Eve, I think there's maybe only 4 games where either Sutton or Shearer didn't score, which is important because you for all these Fowler and Cole and Shearer before, and Collymore or whatever, all these exciting talents that are there, you can't rely on one. And if Shearer doesn't score, Sutton will, and sometimes, and quite often times, both of them turn up. One game where neither of them scored, but 2 Blackburn players did, was a 4-2 defeat the Monday Night Football just before that game at the City ground against Man United. Entertaining game. Paul Warhorst, who we expressed our love for. I think
love
last
Paul
week,
Warhorst on here, yes.
Lovely chip to put Blackburn ahead. There's a penalty that Andy Gray almost jumps from the commentary position down to remonstrate with the referee. But again, it's maybe just an inability to understand where the direction of travel is going. Cantona scores. Come back to that in a minute. Don't let me forget. Colin Hendry, but puts Blackburn back in front. Now, they lose Henning Berg. I think Berg's sent off, I think, for that situation, which obviously has an impact. Kanchelskis literally runs away with it, and he scores. He's instrumental in others, as United end up winning 4-2. A few things from this. We're going to talk about Kanchelskis a few episodes later being jettisoned and why he was jettisoned. And again, in my mind, David, I just felt that he'd kind of burnt out as a bright star by that point. And it was just a season where he just didn't. He is on fire at the start of this season.
Yeah.
And there's a game in the spring that we'll come to that probably signalled the end of that personal relationship with the manager. And if that personal relationship with the manager is gone, you're gone. But at this moment in time, he is absolutely superb. And for all the controversy in Dalglish, very much making a lot of that incident, United were well worth their win that evening.
Cracking game, total blood and thunder. 2 teams that went for each other. There was no love lost on that field or in the dugouts or in the stands. And 4-2 in this year is quite high scoring. Still, it feels that way to us, especially between top teams. But it was back and forth. And Kanchelskis electric, Martin. Just when he got going, I mean, just ludicrous pace and ability to carry the ball at that pace and direct, just quickest possible beeline to goal or byline. And he's superb that night. You wanted to mention the penalty? You wanted me to remind you?
I did. It's Cantona's. There are some penalty takers. I mentioned Stuart Pearce earlier, apart from the obvious in Turin. Strikes a ball so hard that if it's on target, a goalkeeper has no chance at all. Alan Shearer didn't miss many. There are penalty takers who just strike it so well. They maybe just take so many penalties that the law of averages, they're going to sky one, perhaps. But that's the only reason that they are going to miss. The keepers are going to fucking need it. Cantona, I don't know if he really hits penalties that well, but he has a presence when he steps up that I think makes contact almost redundant. There's some kind of Jedi mind trick to jump from another sport or to another sport around this time as we go into the winter of 94-5 and the Ashes series down under. Warren takes a hat-trick, just back from injury, I think. And they're not 3 balls of the century, but he has something. There's something going on when he just goes to his mark and starts flipping the ball up.
Freaking Shane Warne's just about to bowl to you, Martin. Yeah, 100%.
And Cantona, it is all charisma. I don't think it's a technically brilliant player, but so many of his penalties are just rolled in, and there are other players like that. But they just have an aura that just turns goalkeepers' brains to mush, I think.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Look, you don't need to be a drunken person at a hen night to see the aura from Eric Cantona, right? He has it, and he has that almost otherworldly self-confidence, and he is staring at you as a goalkeeper. Pressure situation anyway, by the way. Any Premier League penalty. But there you have Eric Cantona standing at you, who almost by sheer force of will, as you say, is, by the way, I'm going to score this. You are a bit part player in this movie, which I am the star of, right? So this is my moment has arrived. And Warren's another example of it. Had those 3 balls came out the hand of another talented test spinner, would they have got 3 wickets? Probably not. But you scramble people's brains by what you've done previously and who you are. And I think you're absolutely right. No, he wasn't a scudder. He missed a few, can't I, to be fair? Because you're right. If the keeper went the right way, he could throw his cap over some of them. But I think, this was not a guy who ever approached a penalty mark thinking, oh, I hope I score this.
I might miss. Yeah.
That just didn't factor.
It's such a psychological battle. That is us for now. And on Halloween then, 1994, Newcastle United, after 12 games, are top of the Premier League. 29 points. Nottingham Forest, 2 points behind, with 27. United on 25. Blackburn, 24. And Liverpool, 23. Leeds, Chelsea, Norwich, just behind. Arsenal and Spurs, mid-table, and more about the Gunners next week for sure. Everton, David, rock bottom, 4 points. Ipswich 7, newly promoted Leicester with 9, and
4 points
Villa, as we talked about too. Yes, it's absolutely.
Come on.
Yeah. It is horrific.
Man was an idiot, Martin. The man was an idiot.
We won't have to talk about him ever again. Because he is not gracing this show, I don't think, after this week. But thank you, David.
My pleasure as always, mate. Thank you.
Next week is the dark side of this particular season. Scandal, corruption, and managerial sackings left, right, and centre. It is a special one for sure. And of course, kicking fans on your way off the pitch as well, and how pivotal that one was. I mentioned that Manchester United win over Newcastle 2-0 it was. And the player who scored the second goal for Manchester United that night was Keith Gillespie. Kevin Keegan took note. He could be a player he could use, if only there's some way of a make-weight to make that deal. We will speak next week about that and many other bits and pieces. Until then, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts, and breakdowns dropping every other day.